So, hello everybody who is either lurking in the chat and or watching in the future. And welcome to our primer on classical reception, as February is going to be a classical reception month to serve as a month-long transition from Hercules to the Sandman.
Hello, folks. Okay, so before we get started proper, you all know that I studied classical reception at master's level. I'm not going to be pitching it, but let's be clear here. This is a conversation. This is so we're basically saying everything now that we don't want to repeat every week for the next 4 weeks. And we're getting it out there. We're laying some groundwork because it's an entire area of study. It's my specialism, and there's a lot of things that I realised we can either say now or we can say every week and like an hour every week just saying the same things. It'll get boring for you and it'll get boring for us. So let's not do that. Cool. We do have a slideshow. As you can see, it will be on screen. I think Ringer's also put the link to it in the description. Am I right?
Yes, at the very top of the description, as well as all the sources and the regular links.
Brilliant, perfect. Right, I knew I could count on you for something.
Yay.
Yay. Right, okay. So let's crack on because there's no point in waiting around. Ring, do you want to go to? Yep. Cool. So Ring's controlling the slideshow because I'm sat in a hotel room somewhere. Therefore, that's why you don't get camera noodle today.
And also, as is the typical way things are done, the person who isn't giving the presentation controls the slides.
Yeah. So we're going to start off with working definitions of some basic key terms that are really important because sometimes semantics matter. This is one of those times. So first of all, what is classical reception? Ring? Okay, so classical reception is how the classical world, in our case, specifically ancient Greek and Latin literature, being seen in antiquity. So this is not about ancient history. It's not about dates, timelines, and who did what, where, when, and why. It's about how we understand, view, think, comment on, understand ancient cultures and history. Now, for me, it's specifically ancient Greek and Latin. It can also include Norse cultures. It can include Middle Eastern cultures. It can include Oriental. I don't like using that word, but Chinese culture and history, Japanese culture and history, South American, USA quote unquote prehistory, which is basically anything that happened before white people got there
because yay, colonialism.
So that's what classical reception is. It's not about what happened, it's about how we understand what happened. Westerns in American culture. They don't tell you what happened in the American West. They give you a flavour of how it might have been. And we'll be reckoning that as we move on to our next definition of what an adaptation is. You're going to see us throw a lot of words around like adaptation and translations and referencing, which we're going to go through those 2 points next. But an adaptation is an altered or amended version of a piece of art or media designed to present the plot or idea or the themes in an original work to a new audience or in a new way. So the thing about adaptations is they are fundamentally transformative in nature. That's what makes them different from a straight up representment. I
Right.
can put on a play as it was in ancient Greece. A that's not an adaptation. That's putting on that play. If I put on, if I make up a modern version of that play, that's an adaptation. It's modernized or there's something different about it.
Yeah. Usually in modern media discussion, adaptation tends to refer to translating something from one medium to another.
Yes, but also no.
Yeah.
So in adaptations, as I said, fundamentally transformative, but also they generally designed to alter something fundamental about the original piece, be it its form from play to song, from novel to film, or something like that, or it's to make the original piece more palatable to the audience and how they are receiving it. You know, if you go to see an opera about an ancient Greek myth, it's going to tell that ancient Greek myth, but I promise you that the ancient Greeks weren't hearing that story by listening to a soprano. Not how that
Yeah.
works, and therefore that's an adaptation because it is a fundamentally different form to how it's shown anywhere else.
Yeah.
But it is the same story.
Yeah.
And there's adaptations. Technically, Shakespeare's historical plays are adaptations. Technically, um, we'll get onto that. Hollywood does it a lot. The big smash hit of the summer is an adaptation of a book.
Yeah.
Technically, parody is a form of adaptation. Um, so let's move on from that, which fundamentally alters the nature of a text or a piece of historical culture, to translation, which has the goal of not altering the text in any meaningful way. This is communicating the meaning of the source language text by means of equivalent target language text. What does it mean in language A? How can I present that in language B so it has the same meaning, the same nuances, the same ideas behind it? If I say hello in English, I say bonjour in French. That's translation in very, very simple terms.
Yeah. I mean, depending on the context.
Yeah. Interpretation, but translation tries to retain that context
Yeah.
a little bit. Now, there's a lot more to discuss about translation. There's an entire slide dedicated to it later, so I'm not going to get into it here. But things like sign language interpretation, adding subtitles to a to a film that's not in English, or watching a film with subtitles in your own language rather than the language it's in. The subtitler has made decisions in their translation of the film that are going to impact how you receive that film, that may or may not be loyal to what the film's going for. I'll put a pin in that as well. Before we talk about referencing, when you mention or allude to something, you make an in joke. Things are a cultural zeitgeist. You can talk about something, and most of the people in your generation are going to get it, or within your little in group. In psychology, there's this concept of in group dynamics. Media Musings is an in group. When we talk about the channel punching bag, everyone knows what we're talking about, and that's understood. Because making a group of centaurs rape a character you don't like for being too girly and then not having the bollocks to say it outright, while your main character is taunts her about it, is not classical reception, JK. At best, it's an illusion, and it's pretty sick. So let's avoid doing that in future, please. Thank you. Hashtag easy fit.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are our working definitions. Now, as I don't know if who we've got in the chat, but if we've got any questions before we move on about those definitions, now's the time to throw them out there.
Yeah. Currently, we don't seem to be having anyone in the chat.
Okay. So, any questions, Ray?
Uh,
Because you're basically my
yeah.
avatar for the everyman. So.
Not really. So, brain is not doing okay. So, like a good example of adaptation versus translation is most people read a translation of Les Miserables while seeing it in the BBC miniseries, or seeing Les Mis would be an adaptation.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's a brilliant example. Exactly what we were going for.
Yeah.
And and Les Miserables makes reference to the Napoleonic Wars, makes reference to other things that are part of that culture at that time. It's not a showing it's of Les Mis if the streets of Paris aren't shown.
Yeah.
So yeah, next slide.
Okay.
You didn't keep up.
Oops. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about reception versus adaptation. Either, neither, both? Maybe. Okay. So, one of the crucial things in this area is fidelity. But fidelity to what? And, insert something profound about the nature of truth and lies here.
Yeah.
Fidelity to a story isn't necessarily fidelity to the truth. When Shakespeare wrote Antony and Cleopatra, he wasn't writing a textbook. He was giving a flavour of the time, the politics, the situation the characters were in, and the faithfulness to the strict progression of events. I wouldn't use Shakespeare to base your understanding of history on. And the reason for that is because of the intent of when people create adaptations. Click for me, Rin.
Okay.
And
Come
just
on.
keep clicking 3 times. And again. Cool. So we've got, when we talk about intent, the most important question is not what someone said, it's who said it. That's how you begin to interrogate something. Who said it? Who decided to adapt this thing? You can talk about the original writer of a play, a story, Homer's Odyssey. You think about Homer's intent. You also think about the intent of the person translating the text that you read. You also think about the intent of the person adapting it. So take Homer's Odyssey example. How does the intent of ancient Greek and Roman bards telling that story differ from the intent of Virgil writing the Aeneid, which is very loosely an adaptation of the Odyssey? How does that again from when the Coen brothers made Oh Brother Where Art Thou?
Yeah.
Their context that they existed, their values, their the expectations of their audience and their expectations of the audience all matter. Intent could a writer, it can be the performer if it's a song or another piece of media like that. In opera, famously, are given a little bit of leeway to play with the sounds they use. The composer and the conductor has a little bit of leeway in different performances. Can the person who created the adaptation, who came up with the idea to adapt it in the first place?
Yeah.
What are the financial interests in this adaptation? What are the political interests behind this adaptation? For example, isn't it interesting how America started to lose the global war on terror and suddenly superhero media made a massive comeback?
Yeah.
This is what we mean by intent. If the Marvel series or war films are getting funding from the Pentagon, you should probably know that before you sit down and watch them. There's a way they exist outside of just being plain entertainment.
Yeah.
And then with the expectations, you've got what do the audience want? What do they think they want? On what can they be given in a way they don't expect? Most people, for example, when you get an adaptation of the Odyssey, want to see something resembling the Cyclops incident.
Yeah.
Look at how that's presented in Oh Brother Where Art Thou? He's not a Cyclops. He's not even much of a giant. He's just a big bloke. But the right story beats are there enough that it feeds into that story. And it's that expectation of what we expected versus what we got, but in a good way.
Yeah.
Subversion of expectation doesn't have to be a bad thing. Not everything is the finale of Game of Thrones. I never saw it, but I saw the kerfuffle.
Same.
Not everything is that. Subverting expectations is not a bad thing, but it has to be handled delicately and with a skilled touch. And then you have the context of adaptations. Click for me, Ring.
Yep.
5 times. So you have context.
Yeah.
When we talk about context, what we're talking about is the environment this text, this story lives in. So to understand a story, you have to understand the world it exists in. Like, you can sit down and watch, like I said, Marvel movies with popcorn with them, but you understand them a little bit more if you understand that they're backed by the American military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
You have a deeper understanding of those films and why Tony Stark isn't an evil warmonger and isn't presented that way when you understand that these films are released smack in the middle of war on terror and they need people and audiences to believe that weapons makers aren't monsters.
Yeah.
You know, and therefore, when you look at adaptations, and again, I'm going to keep using Our Brother Where Art Thou as an example because it's a brilliant one and I like it.
Yeah.
When you think about modern adaptations, ask yourself the question, why? Why now? Why did they decide to remake this story now?
Yeah.
What did they think in this story was going to appeal to a modern audience? What is the writer, the producer, the character, the creator, the performer? What are they trying to say? Art does not exist in a vacuum, and media does not exist in a vacuum. And
Yeah.
usually it
Oh,
exists because someone's trying to tell you something.
oops.
Yes. No, you can bring that up. That's fine.
Okay.
So when you're talking about the creator, something about the person that makes them doing for this adaptation. Shakespeare's Roman plays, just as America was being discovered. Spike Lee's Chirac.
Yeah. Chirac.
That is classic Spike Lee, but it's also very obviously an adaptation of Lysistrata. She's the Man, an early 2000s story on a Shakespeare play. Coriolanus, again, Shakespeare. Orfeo and Eurydice, the opera, in 2004. Do you think it's an accident that there was an influx of stories of gladiators and ancient Rome fighting for the soul of ancient Rome just as the global war on terror kicked off? Just at the turn of the century, when everything was in question, scared the YK bug was going to throw us back into the Stone Age. That was
Yeah.
not an accident. These things happened for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, the whole world was reckoning with itself in 1999. Who are we and who are we going to be going into this new century? It was the first time as a planet that we were connected internationally in a way that allowed us to have that worldwide.
You know this is going to be a good stream because you're snap crackling and popping like Rice Krispies.
Whoops. Any better?
I think so, but we'll have to see.
Cool. Where are we? Okay. So the early 2000s.
No, not better.
Not better.
It's like I swear it was good before we started streaming. We chatted for like a half hour and it was crystal clear.
Of course it was.
Yeah. But why do you think a R-rated movie adaptation of Frank Miller's rendition of the Battle of Thermopylae was so popular in the early 2000s?
Exactly. So fundamentally, the question you have to ask yourself, you have a few questions to ask. What links modern to the ancient audience? What does the person who chose to make this piece of media think that the audience now has in common with the audience who first saw this story?
Yeah.
In order that this story will resonate. why does someone somewhere believe enough to spend money, time, and effort to tell a story? It's because they believe this story has something to say to a new audience in a new way.
Yeah.
There is a fundamental universal truth being told. Now, again, something profound about the nature of truth and lies. What truth is not objective,
Yeah.
but there are truths within stories. There are, we see Orpheus, the story of Orpheus, a love story of a man ready and willing to walk into the arms of death itself. Life.
Yeah.
Chirac story of war and how that impacts families and communities, translated into modern gang warfare. You know, these stories, we keep telling them because they're familiar, because the people in them have familiar ideas and motivations to us. Because what it is to be human has not fundamentally changed between the first telling of these stories and the tellings we're making now. So yeah, and I mean, what did you expect from an opera? Happy ending?
Yeah.
Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to talk about translations. We're going to take that pin out of translations. Keep going. And there are a lot of issues with translation. Now, when I talked about translation, I said that it's fundamentally trying not to alter the text in any meaningful way. So it's trying to get across the same as the original in the same way, or as close as it can.
Yeah.
And there are probably translations for every 27 German word, but we try.
Yeah.
That's what that's there for. Now, issues of translation, context, bias, cultural mores, degrees of separation. You can compare translations, and we are going to discuss in a lot of depth accuracy versus authenticity in translation. Now, you will see at the bottom right of your screen there is a link to a Twitter thread by Emily Wilson.
Yep. And it is also in the description below.
Brill, thank you. Who is the quote-unquote first woman to publish a translation of the Odyssey. Asterisk. Massive asterisk because she's not. She is, however, the first woman to translate the Odyssey into English. And so you need to understand when you talk about translations, the context. A translation in ancient Greek to French might not have the same nuances, the same ways the language behaves as a translation into English would, or a translation into German, Italian, Russian, Polish, Spanish, any language, insert any language you like here. And when you read translations, I presume most of our audience is going to be reading translations into English. To understand that the way English works is not ancient Greek worked or the way Latin works. Latin has a much more fluid sentence structure than us. Subject, object, and verb are very movable within a Latin sentence, and you can You can write a 3-word Latin sentence in any order you want, and it'll make sense to someone who can read Latin, and they'll come away with the same answer for what that sentence means. But
Yeah.
the way you order the words then becomes about where do you want your emphasis to fall, talking. Do you want to emphasize the person in the sentence? Do you want to emphasize what they're doing? Or do you want to emphasize the thing they're doing it to? That matters.
Yeah.
That creates nuance in the language. And the context as well. When, for example, women translators, and again, back to Emily Wilson, who says quite clearly, I put not the first woman to publish a translation of the Odyssey on my Twitter bio after seeing it asserted for the gazillionth time. Strongly, strongly recommend reading that thread. That thread is a great introduction to why translation is such an important issue and why you cannot just accept someone else's translation blindly. If you are reading classical texts, ancient texts, Greek texts, look at the lower library online. Look at Perseus online. They'll give you different translations, and you can compare them side by side to get an idea of how different translators view different things. So, for example, there's a lot of in the Odyssey. There's a lot of discussion of I'm going to call her Circe because that's how most people would pronounce it in English. And the way she's described in a lot of older translations by men, for example. And I'd say men because we're talking about the 1800s when they were wearing hats and cravats. And, they were all at Oxford and Cambridge smoking pipes and all those kind of men.
Yeah.
Were translating some of the tasks for this woman in a very unflattering way. And for a lot of women, when they described women, the ancient Greek would describe the woman as a woman or a female, or not female as in female on the internet and oh my god, you call them female, you're an incel. Female as in the female of the species, a very neutral term. But they would translate these words to mean witch, bitch, whore, slut. Because they were bringing their own moral values to what these women were doing in the stories.
Yeah.
And translating accordingly. Now, there is a fantastic little story I want to share of Anne Lefevre Dacia. Mango, that my French is really old, Francis. If you look at our slideshow, it's in the comments. I will make those public. But the first woman to translate the Odyssey from Greek to French mocked her male colleagues for using, and I quote, bombastic language in their translations, in contrast to Homer's straightforward language in the original. She claimed that their intention was to elevate themselves above the Greek original. Not only were they relying on the gravitas of an ancient text, they were trying to elevate it in order to elevate their own reputations, academic standing, whatever you want to say. She was basically saying that all ego. And Wilson's notes, when Wilson translated into English recently, she points out that her translation avoids trumpeting its own status with bright, noisy, linguistic fireworks. And that tradition of translators doing that and flowering up the language, making it a little bit more purple, a little bit more elegiac, goes all the way back to Pope. And what do you expect when you've got mostly it's poets who are doing these things?
Yeah.
You will all, I'm sure, remember the kerfuffle about a woman translating the Odyssey. Gasp, shock, horror. She must be biased. She must think that, of course, her translation's going to be different. She's biased. She's not biased. All she's done is break the paradigm of the male translator is the default.
Yeah.
And that's important because if we assume that the default is a upper to middle class straight white male from the 1800s and that his translation is the default and quote unquote correct translation, we
Yeah.
are always going to assume that every time the word slut, whore, witch appears in the text, that's how it was in the ancient Greek. When a woman comes along and says, no, actually, it just describes her as a woman,
Yeah.
that changes the meaning of the text and it changes how we receive the text.
And something pissing and moaning about no one studying Latin or Greek anymore.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I didn't study Latin or Greek. What Latin or Greek I know, I picked up from Perseus and Lower, and I do my best. You don't have to study Latin or Greek. You just have to understand how to compare translations. It's worth having. Perseus is free. You can go there. You can look up the different translations, compare and contrast, read the comment on all of them, and decide which is best for what the text is trying to say. And if you can read Latin or Greek, you can go back, you can read the original and see whether you agree. And I don't believe in the 21st century that it is necessary to speak Latin or Greek to understand classical reception. The university I studied with for classical reception does not require any experience of handling Latin or Greek texts. And the first assignment I did was, this is in ancient Greek. Write us an essay on what it means. And the way we did that, we went to find it, Perseus on Loeb within ancient Greek. We looked at its context, we looked at what people commented on it, compared and contrasted, and then decided, what does this word mean? Does this word mean something different when it's translated into Latin? Does it then mean something different if it's translated in a biblical context versus an extra biblical context? In a legal context versus a common law context? And that's how you get to an idea of what something means. Now that's a lot of work. You have to do that single word in a book. That's a lot of work. But it's worth it sometimes. If you think a word doesn't quite sit right with you, if something feels a little bit off, if it's jarring, it's worth going and checking what the original word was, trying to figure it out. Again, I am going to use the example because my brain's on opera right now. When you go to the opera, in modern days, there's usually a screen with subtitles. You will notice very quickly that the subtitles on the screen do not match exactly what the singer is saying because they've sung 12 words and you've got 4 up on the screen. And sometimes it is worth libretto in English, reading different versions of the libretto, which is basically the translation and the writing down of what the singers are saying, to figure out what the hell they're saying, because they're not. You're being given a translation, and if you don't speak Italian or German or French, whatever language the opera is in, you're going to miss nuances of the conversation. Perfect example. I went to see Madame Butterfly last night, and there's a line in that opera that is incredibly racist and has been torn down and was torn down from the original by the original composer like 200 years ago. Where the American consul in Japan tells Madame Butterfly, and the subtitles came up and said, a, a boy without a father will not be accepted in America. This is based in the 1800s. But if you read the libretto and if you understand just enough Italian to grasp that that's not the words that came out of his mouth, um, what he's basically giving is a commentary on race relations in America and how a mixed race Japanese American child won't be accepted in America in the 1800s, which is a very different statement to make, and it's therefore much more understandable when she comes at him with a kitchen knife when he's told her that, rather than just saying a boy
Yeah.
without a father. Just to give that as an example. And that's one of the things. The people subtitling that opera last night made a decision to word it on the subtitles. And equally, if you go to the opera, you miss a lot of the comedy. If you don't understand the Italian, it's worth spending a couple of weeks on Duolingo just so you can get the gist, or reading the librettos beforehand. I have also shared a source, which I'm sure Rinna's dropped in the description, of Emily Wilson talking about translating Homer as a woman. It describes the experience of translation as an intimate alienation, which is an absolutely perfectly evocative description. And I strongly, strongly advise you to go read the article. It's on Vox. While we carry on through discussing more controversies of translation, if Ring would like to do some clicking. Okay, so some of these I've talked about and touched on, some of them I haven't, but they are there.
Yeah.
Sometimes translations are deliberately controversial. People go out of their way to change the language, alter it. If you choose to go back and pick a text, if for example, I don't know why you would, but let's say someone chose to translate a controversial text, a text that maybe was to propose political ideals that are no longer acceptable in polite society. Or let's say someone chose to go back, and when they translated a text, like I said, these men in the 1800s translated the word woman to witch, to whore, slut, bitch. That's deliberate. When you're translating, it's an active thing. Therefore, every choice you make is a choice and has a motive behind it. When you are looking for modern translations, please, please, please. I know it's so tempting when you're looking at a software and you're like, how modern translations really expensive. I'm gonna go on Project Gutenberg and read the work from the 1700s. Understand what you are making there. It's going to affect how you receive that text, because there is a degree of separation of language, target language in the 1700s. I'm sure anyone who's read any book from the 1700s will tell you, or I'm sure you'll know if you've read one yourself. That ain't our English.
Yeah, well,
we don't speak English as our great grandparents.
Like there's a reason I call the King James version the Shakespeare Practice Bible.
Yes, exactly. Shakespearean English is not modern English. It's Middle English. And if a text has been translated and it's been translated, like Bulwell's a prime example, because you've got, it's a Old English text which was translated into Middle English, then translated into Late Middle English, then modern English. And if someone is, sometimes translators rely on earlier translations rather than the original. So if I'm looking to translate, say, a Latin text, I might, maybe I'll go find a translation from the 1700s of that Latin text. And maybe I'll use that Latin text to inform how I translate in the modern day. But that's a choice I've made. And therefore that creates an extra degree of separation between me and the original Latin, and between my audience in the original Latin. So it's you have to be aware of where your translators are getting their information from, and if it's direct translation or not. There are issues of accessibility around that. I understand why people go for old translations. They're cheap, they're easily accessible online. I get it. I absolutely get it. Just if you're going to do it, you have to be aware of the issues. And translations, as I said earlier, do not just exist in English. If you read the Odyssey in French, if you read it in German, if you read it in Danish, if you read it in whatever language you usually chat, like Spanish or like, you know, you're going to read it differently to how we'd read it in English. Prime example, when I used to do the Asterix streams with Scummer, I used to have Hops in the chat. We'd be talking about something on the Asterix, about the puns in the names or anything else. And Hops would be commenting on what they were in Danish.
Yeah.
They took the general meaning of what the name was. But they were the same name because the words didn't translate. And in the French, they weren't the same as in the English.
Yeah.
Because they didn't translate. And making decisions on whether you keep the word or whether you keep the meaning of the word, and that matters. As does things like gender, sexuality. You know, if a gay man writes about the Band of Thieves, he's probably going to write it a little bit differently than a straight man. You know, if a straight man gets hold of the Iliad, Achilles and Patroclus become cousins, and you get Troy 2004.
Yeah, they're just good friends. Just two
really
good
they are
friends.
Literally cousins. Yeah, they are literally cousins in 2004. Equally, if you get a fangirl who cut her teeth writing fan fiction, like Madeline Miller, they are absolutely boyfriends and have been since they were 12 years old and don't have me. That goes down. Context matters. The context of the text itself, the person translating the text, creating the text. Now, Madeline Miller is not a translation, but that point still stands. So, yeah, that's issues of translation. This is why, for example, famously, Muslims and the Quran has not changed since it was first written down. And they have to learn the language of the Quran, and they learn the Quran in the original language. And one of their criticisms of the English Bible, of religious texts in that vein in Christianity, are that they are translations, and you lose meaning, lose nuance, and everyone's working off different translations. And how can you be talking about the same text when it's not even the same words on the page? Bible translation. You look at King James, Living Bible, New International Version. They're so different. They may as well be totally different stories sometimes. King James waxes literally pages. New International Version uses 2 lines and a footnote.
Yeah.
And everything in between. If you look at translations of, like, even if you look at the Gospels and the stories they're telling, they tell the same stories from different points of view, and yet we think the person who wrote Matthew's used Matthew's Gospel as a source. So again, it's that degree of separation from the story. Is it Matthew or John's Gospel?
You got it backwards. Matthew and Luke used Mark, and John did his own thing.
Right, there you go. Yeah, and this is why you're here for me.
Yes.
I appreciate you. Yeah. So Matthew and John, Matthew and
Luke.
use Mark, and therefore anything Mark said, Matthew and Luke are relying on. And then already got that 1 degree of separation in that they're relying on someone else's story. Then you've got it's being translated the Greek into Latin, then from Latin into Middle English, then Middle English into Modern English. You're 4 degrees of separation away before you've even picked the book up in the modern day.
That'll be truly bold if you think that we'd deign to befoul our holy text with a modern tongue.
This is why you're here, and I do love and appreciate it. But yeah, no. So again, there's 4 degrees of separation between the original Mark's Gospel in which was written, I think, in Latin with touches of Aramaic in there, and or was it in Greek? I can never remember. Biblical scholar folk. I'm not a biblical in the Greek, through the Latin, through 3 iterations English and multiple things. There's more degrees of separation between us and the original text of Mark's Gospel than there probably are between any two humans on it. You are probably more close. You are probably more closely related to a person on the other side of the world than the modern version of Mark's Gospel is to the original. Like by degrees of separation. Like you probably have more in common with a dolphin, DNA-wise. And you have to. This is why people argue and talk about different translations and meanings. This is why the church regularly has to hold councils on it, and why the Catholic Church is still 2,000 years later releasing commentary on dogma and on biblical quotes and things. Because translations are an issue, and it solves a lot of problems. It means that you don't have to teach the unwashed masses high-level understanding of a foreign language when most of them are not literate in their own. But it does cause a lot of problems. And I would say that it's caused there's a reason the Christian church is now many churches and not Catholic. And I think a big part of that is translation issues. I'm not saying Luther didn't have a point when he nailed his thesis to the door. And if he'd have done it in the original Greek and everything else had been done in the original Greek, he'd probably have had about 4 theses and a footnote. Just saying. You know, because those arguments wouldn't have come up because it would have been much clearer what was intended. But then I want to go back, and I'm going to go on to the next slide, and we're going to talk about accuracy versus authenticity in translation. And I'm going to, as Ring is clicking through to bring this slide up, and just bring everything up, Ring, it's fine.
Okay.
Because I have a confession to make. I showed Ring this slide, and this slide originally only had those bullet points on them and the words head versus heart. And then Ring said to me, "Oh, do you know that OSP have done a video in which they discuss accuracy versus authenticity in adaptations, specifically relative to how the Assassin's Creed series presents medieval and knowing what I know about OSP and Blues of Storms, I can exactly imagine how that went. So I went, and Ring sent me the link. And you can go watch that, and if you watch the 7 or 8 minutes that I've given you the timestamp for, that's basically good. Everything I'm gonna say here, probably a lot more eloquently and funnier too. So you can go watch that and just ignore me for a little bit if you want, but don't.
Yeah.
So accuracy, historic accuracy. That happened in that order, the way it says, in that way. Did you've all been a bit one episode of the Borgias where Pope Alexander Sextus has a Fabergé egg on his desk 300 years before Fabergé was ever born. You've all heard. I'm sure everyone has seen that one clip in The Gladiator of the guy in jeans and a t-shirt holding a boom mic. I'm sure we've all watched period dramas where they have zips in their dresses and their clothes are modern cuts and their hairlines are all wrong. Or, if you've watched Downton Abbey and you look and you think some of those costumes are not. Some of those are very modern. For example, there's Mary Queen of Scots, a HBO series. I don't think they had sewing machines when Mary Queen of Scots was wearing dresses. But her dress is very obviously machine sewn in several episodes. The settings, like, if you walk through certain films and you see in the background, sometimes there are historic buildings and they've forgotten to cover the blue outside the building. Or there are linguistic issues. They talk like modern people, but it's supposed to be the 1600s. Like, okay. All of these things are issues of accuracy. Accuracy is a very black and white question. Is it correct or not? Did it happen on this date, at this time, in this way, and did it look like yes or no? Those are all yes-no questions. And accuracy matters to an extent. To an extent, it does matter. But I don't think they matter too much. Does, for example, my noticing that the Pope having a Fabergé egg on his desk 300 years before Fabergé eggs invent ruin my enjoyment of that TV show? Absolutely not. Jeremy Irons gives a fantastic performance as Alexander Sextus. Eat your heart out. Great program. Love it. Brilliant. Cesare Borgia. Yep. Perfect. No notes. Like, Jeremy Irons plays a Pope, Cesare Borgia is his son. No notes. Great story. Because the story is fundamentally authentic to the feel of the Vatican, of Rome, of the opulence and the riches that chose to surround himself with. Like, someone who wants to live a humble, frugal life with 2 changes of clothes doesn't own a Fabergé egg. If for as an idea, in ancient Rome, the way you showed your riches was by having colour on your toga, coloured stripe on your toga for a senator. It was purple, and purple was expensive. It was worth more than its weight in gold. It was the dye. It was expensive. It was a status symbol, and so this is what we still view the colour purple and deep reds and velvets with. Those are royal colours. There's a reason. If you look at photographs and video of the royal family at statings, the Queen wears this long flowing cloak with a fur trim, and it was like purple velvet. and it looks, and even in official statues of her, that's what she's wearing, because that's what that represents. Cardinals wear red. It symbolises blood, but it's also an expensive dye to get that right. And in this, but those kind of things don't always translate across cultures. What one person calls rich, another person doesn't. So wearing purple in ancient Rome or in medieval times was expensive. How would you, without saying it, tell me someone is rough to have worn purple in medieval times in 2023? How do you do it? Serious question, Ring. How would you do it?
So how would I show?
Sure, someone is Elon Musk levels rich. Like, how would you, but also has class? Like, how would you show that?
Put a Fabergé egg on the desk.
Yeah. Maybe you'd put them in an Armani suit.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd put a Rolex on their wrist. Maybe you'd put a gold ring on their finger. If it's a woman, maybe the brooch she's wearing has real diamonds in it. You know, maybe she's wearing $2,000 shoes and a $5,000 handbag.
Yeah.
These are the markers of status. And if you want to show me someone is a high-powered politician with a lot of money, I mean, the last 10 years notwithstanding, because that just blew all expectations out of the water. But the way you would do it, like if you go back to early 2000s and you look at films, you look at the politician, the president in the movie Independence Day, how do they show that he's a Democrat, but also quite well off and obviously like modelled after JFK? He's a Democrat, so they give him a black wife. He's well off, so they put him in sharp suits. And they make him clean shaven to make him look young. And they give him a rousing speech. And that's how we know this man is important. This man is those things. It hits the story beats. And you can do that with translations as well. You know, how do we know that our characters in Oh Brother Where Art Thou? How do we know that our fast-talking character of himself as a man's man? Dapper Dan man.
Yeah.
How do we know that there are problems with the family and the way he's dressed? Look at the difference between how he's dressed with how the wife's new man is dressed, and what his children say to him. You're not bona fide.
Yeah.
It's the class differences, and those are very hard to translate across cultures. There's no point in me taking, in medieval times, it was a status symbol to be fat. It was a status symbol to have enough fat. You were fat. Now, if you tried to show that someone was so rich they were fat now, that doesn't clash with our modern culture. Like rich people, when we look at rich people, they're all skinny and plastery up, you know, everything from the neck up's made of plastic, and most of the stuff from the neck down probably is as well. It's all nipped and tucked and, you know, surgically changed. And they're at the gym 5 times a week and they eat vegan, and you know, these are markers not just of politics but of their class. The idea that someone in 2023 can be rich and fat, that doesn't jive with our modern beauty standards.
Yeah.
And so those, you have to change. Like if you take a Shakespeare play and you've got a character who is opulently rich, how do you translate? So, for example, let's see. I'm trying to think of the Shakespeare play everyone will be familiar with. Okay, let's do Julius Caesar. Let's do Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Let's say you want the character, Shakespeare's character of Julius Caesar, not the historic Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. You were going to a modern adaptation of the story. So what do you have? You have upper class politician.
Yeah.
Politician for the working. Politician who is modern and forward thinking.
Yeah.
How do you present him on stage? You don't present him as being overweight, sat around with slaves fanning him and bringing him grapes, do you?
No.
But that's how you would present a Roman politician.
Yeah. Something Crassus and Spartacus.
Yes, exactly. How do you present Crassus? Poor Crassus. But yeah. and this is the way we do it. When you're talking about Odysseus in all the plays is always built like a brick shithouse. He's a fighter and he's strong. But then you can create a character who is skinny as a whip. You want to focus more on the character's intelligence and cunning. There's a reason, and again, there are other reasons also, but we're going to ignore those for a second. There's a reason. If you want to, okay, describe for me, Ring. Close your eyes. Describe for me a cunning person. Physically, what do they look like?
Probably a bit on the thinner, under-muscled side. Or if they are muscled, they've got more of an acrobat gymnast physique rather than a brawler, weightlifter, football heavy physique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right. You're right. And they're probably dressed in dark clothes because they're sneaky.
Yeah.
And they probably talk quite slowly and quite deliberately. And they're probably talking a lot of double entendres and puns. And then you look at that, but that's not Odysseus in the Iliad. Odysseus in the Iliad is a fighter, warrior. He just happens to be also the smart aleck of the group.
Yeah.
Because their opinion of what made someone different physical manifestations than what we imagine. The person you've just described, Ring, is Alan Rickman as Professor Snape.
Yeah.
That's who you've just described.
Well, actually, I was actually kind of picturing like Spider-Man.
Well, that too. Yep.
Yeah.
It's Daredevil. It's not Spider-Man. It's Deadpool to an extent.
Yeah.
Someone who's super more brains than brawn. Yeah. And their physique reflects that, and the way they're dressed reflects that. They're dressed in darker colours or muted colours or colours that blend them into their surroundings. Superman doesn't count for that one because he's a comic book hero and we have comic code colour coding. But,
Batman.
Batman, exactly. Batman, who yes, is strong and fights, but mentally, 90% of Batman's battles are fought with his brain and with technology.
Yeah.
And And that's what you see. That's why Batman can be skinny. It's also why he can have a six pack.
Yep.
And it depends on who's playing him and what the goal is. And that's an important point, because what authenticity gives you when you are talking about adaptations is a flavour. It doesn't just translate the words, it translates the concepts and the ideas and the nuances. And this is why there can sometimes be problems with adaptations and why people have issues with them. Because you expect to see adaptations done a certain way. You have certain expectations. So if I said to you now, I'm going to adapt, let's see, pick a story, any story. I'm going to adapt a story about Sparta, but I'm going to set it during the Vietnam War. You're going to have expectations about what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
You're going to have expectations of who the Spartans are and who the Persians are in that scenario.
Yeah.
I mean, knowing me, you probably fully expect that it to be completely opposite to what most people would do with that brief.
Yeah.
But
no, well, I am literally like picturing like say if we were gonna do Thermopylae as a Vietnam War movie, I'd say the Spartans would be the Viet Cong and the Persians would have been the Americans.
Yeah, and I'd probably base it around the My Lai massacre.
Yeah.
Just off the top of my head. Like, that would be how I would translate that story.
Yeah.
Or if I said I was going to bring a story from, if I was going to translate a story about D-Day into an Iraq story, how would I do that? And that's an adaptation in its own way.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's adaptable and sometimes it's not. And when it's not, that's when you see re-releases and cinema going back and retelling the same stories.
Yeah.
Like, America's been refighting every war it's ever been in on the movie screen pretty much since it started. That's what America does. That's what Hollywood is for.
Something first movie shown in the White House was Birth of a Nation. Damn it, Wilson.
Yeah. And it's like, because I watched a bit of that video that OSP did, and there's a bit where Blue's talking about in Assassin's Creed, there's a church put into Assassin's Creed. That church doesn't exist. It's full stop, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's a Gothic church. It's at least 300 years later than anything that would have existed at the time the Assassin's Creed game is set. And it doesn't exist even if it was there. But when a modern audience thinks medieval Italy, it expects to see something that broadly resembles Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Like in the Gothic architecture and churches with big spires. And it works because 90% of the plot of Assassin's Creed is getting and facing and jump off.
Yeah.
So far as I can tell, I've never played Assassin's Creed.
It's a really fun series to play.
Yeah, I've got Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I've just never got around to it. So I do have to get to that at some point. But yeah. So therefore, sticking a Gothic cathedral in the middle of think Florence, a really tall spire on it.
Yeah.
It works, and a modern audience looks at that and it blends into the surroundings because that's the mental image we've got of that era.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's not accurate in any way, shape, or form. Please don't make the mistake Blue made of going to Florence and asking about a square that doesn't exist because he saw it on Assassin's Creed. Learn from his mistakes.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've done it. When I walked through Rome, I was like, I'm sure there should be something here because I've seen it on a movie and it just wasn't there. And you'll do that, and that's fine because what you're seeing when you see those things that are injected, it's not accuracy, but it's authentic. It gives you a sense of it taps into your cultural expectations to give you a sense of the feelings and emotions and sense of being in a place that the people at the time would have had. And sometimes that feeling is more important than strict accuracy.
Though sometimes that feeling can be more dangerous than strict accuracy.
Yes, it can. And it can be manipulated for nefarious purposes as well. Okay. Look, I'm not having a go, but if you choose to hold your modern day wedding at a former slave plantation, it looks pretty. I want to know what feeling you're trying to evoke in your guests right there.
Yeah.
Because that ain't, people don't have weddings at concentration camps in Europe, America. You're weird.
Yes.
You're weird. That's not what those are for. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
But again, worth considering when you're doing things. But again, the idea of American neoclassical architecture is not accurate to what ancient Roman and Greek architecture was like. It's nowhere near accurate. It's too white. It's too tall. They're all wrong. What are you with the top of the columns? And just did you have a fiddling with a pen? Like, well, opinions. I have opinions.
Yeah.
But when you look at the White House, certain buildings in Washington, the Capitol building, most Capitol buildings in most states in the US, they are modelled after the Parthenon, and they are modelled ancient Roman buildings because they're trying to copy ancient Roman buildings. They're just trying to give you that when you look up at them, a 2,000-year-old history, and it's big and impressive, and look at us with all our white marble, aren't we clever? Sometimes that feeling, they use it to manipulate you, but sometimes that feeling is more important strict. Yeah. I'm saying in you. There's basically within distance of Elrum, is a mini copy of Notre Dame Cathedral. Because anything the French do, we can do better in Yorkshire. Don't at me. But also, it's designed to evoke thoughts of that cathedral. It's got a very similar round stained glass front window. It's got those things because it's falling to and making allusion to those other things. In order to borrow a little bit of their grandeur, a little bit of their gravitas, a little bit of their, what's the word I'm looking for? Starts with a C, means you can rely on it. Credibility.
Yeah.
They're borrowing credibility by invoking these other things. And that credibility is what grounds you in the story and in the aesthetic atmosphere. And it's the atmosphere that matters, and you have to meet your audience's expectations there. When we watch Chirac, I will talk about Chirac, and you'll see how the audience's expectations. You can watch that film knowing nothing about the ancient Greek original, and still take from that film the same messages and meanings as the original Lysistrata. But then you go back and watch that film, understanding Lysistrata, you understand that film on a totally different level.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that it's any better or any worse. It means it's different, and it gives you different receptions. Like we all watched over Christmas, I think half the planet watched Glass Onion over Christmas, and in January, and I'm sure we'll get to it on Media Musings at some point because it's a good movie. And
I've mentally slated Knives Out and Glass Onion for April.
Yay! Okay, so we've got that planned.
Yeah.
And watching them, when you watch them in isolation, they're funny and they're great. You understand them differently if you come from a background of watching Columbo every Sunday afternoon, or watching Agatha Christie, or reading Agatha Christie, or watching TV shows like Murder, She Wrote, or Diagnosis Murder. They are part of a tradition. And when you understand that tradition and that genre, you understand the films differently. It's like people who write romance novels. You can't write a romance novel unless you know. Like, your romance novel will fail in the romance market if you don't hit certain story beats. Like, it doesn't matter where you set it, how you write it, who your main characters are, how good your front cover looks. If you do not hit certain story beats, you are gonna get slammed. Same with high fantasy. Every high fantasy series has to have a plucky hero, a wise wizard, like a race of creatures that are basically cannon fodder, and a great big evil thing that may or may not be a disembodied head / eye / other body part with a loud booming voice.
Yeah.
Like, I think I've just described about 80% of all high fantasy, including most D&D.
Yeah, because we have a problem of high fantasy largely just copying Tolkien.
Yeah, exactly. But if you try to write a high fantasy story and you've never read Tolkien, and you don't know about Tolkien, you're not going to hit the right story beats, are you?
Yeah.
Exactly. It doesn't hit those beats.
Yeah, or why the Mandalorian is such a smash hit is it hits the beats, the tonal beats that it needs to hit for a Star Wars story.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not I'm taking what you say, but yeah, absolutely. And this is the difference between authenticity and accuracy. You can set a story in the far future of space and make it about modern day politics if it hits the right story beats. And it doesn't have to be in the right time period or date. It doesn't have to have the right names or places or things. But if you write a story about a far-flung planet in which an amorphous blob in a wig took over the planet and decided to take the planet to war with and enslave half the planet, it's not going to take a genius to say that you've been watching the American news for the last 10 years.
Or you're doing Dune.
That's just off the top of my head. Oh, you're doing Dune.
You literally just described Dune.
Yes, but how do we know Dune wasn't a prophecy at this point? If every space, sci-fi, movie, TV show, book has a race, like a militaristic race, and they're not even like we even saw it in Disney movies. Every villain who has a group of people following them, at some point that group of people will walk in formation, stepping very loudly, and they'll be wearing grey. Why?
Yeah.
Because immediately that hits the beats of fucking Nazis. These are the fascists. We hate these people. That's what that's for.
Yeah.
And it's not accurate. It is not accurate in the slightest. It doesn't have to be accurate. We saw it done with hyenas, cartoon hyenas. That's not accurate to what Nazi Germany looked like in the slightest. But that's what it evoked in us because it was authentic to the feel.
Yeah.
And it fed into our preconceived notions and expectations. If you hear the strains of Wagner, you know you're about to see something reminiscent of Nazi Germany. You just do, unfortunately. You know, if you hear Flight of Valkyries, you'll expect to see the red arrows going overhead or something.
Yeah, unless you're actually watching Valkyries.
Yeah. Or you watch a movie, you know, if I say to you, you hear the first strains of Stars and Stripes, you immediately know the character that those sounds are linked to is American, is patriotic, probably has a military background, and likes American football.
Yeah.
Like, if a character appears on stage and I hear Stars and Stripes in the background, that's what that means. Yeah. Like, that character can be anyone, but that's what that means. Because it's authentic and it gives that sense of, we've all seen Americans crying at your national anthem during matches. Not sure why, but have at it, enjoy. You know, you hear that you watch Formula One and you hear the bouncy Italian. You know someone's going to start spraying champagne because that's also how that goes. And these things exist in their context. And there are certain sounds, and they can be story beats, they can be audio beats, they can be plot devices, they can be aesthetics. What matters is the feeling they evoke, and it is very much an argument of head versus heart. Yeah. I can show you cartoon hyenas talking about hunting down for meat, and I can make you think of Nazis. Your head should not be saying to you, Nazis. Your head should be saying, this is ludicrous, this is ridiculous, who came up with this, this is utter nonsense. But in your heart and in your emotions, everything's there enough to bring that image up. And I keep going back to that example because we talked about that in depth when we did The Lion King. But that's what that's for. And it is very much a case of those story beats are what makes and breaks the difference between accuracy and authenticity. And that then begins to lead us on to the next question of, let's have a look, which is more important?
Yeah.
Like, is it more important to be accurate or to... Now you can leave that. Is it more important to be accurate or to be authentic? And the problem with talking about accuracy is once you've said, is it accurate or not, there's nothing more to say. And that's boring and that's not what we're here for, so I'm voting for authenticity. Because once you talk about is it authentic, you can talk about, well, why did they do it that way? Why did they choose to evoke that feeling? What was the reason behind it? Where was it going? What was the intention? And it opens up all this scope for questioning. So yes, accuracy, and I am sure that when we do 300, Scummer will have a lot to say about the accuracy, and so will I. Equally, you know, when we talk about Troy, I have got a multiple minute rant on the fact that Achilles and Patroclus were not cousins. Don't at me. What the hell?
So what we're saying is that week is just going to be just like Giant Rant Week.
Yes, but also, do those films present an authentic view of the stories? Is a audience from 2004 ready for Achilles and Patroclus' lovers? And pre-equal marriage rights and everything else, 2004, would making them lovers carry the same weight as making them cousins, maybe even brothers? Although the film doesn't go that far, it makes them cousins who've grown up together. Is that more authentic for the audience who would have been watching that film to understand the depth of love in that relationship?
Yeah.
Without disgusting them because they're homophobic and they haven't done the last 15 years of progress that we've had in that arena.
Yeah.
Maybe. It's an interesting question, and it sure as hell beats a quick conversation of I thought they were lovers, not cousins. Yeah, they were. Okay then. So
we
what?
do have an interesting question right here.
We can. That is an interesting question. Can sometimes when we see in when we're looking for authenticity in stories, can we sometimes find connections where none was intended? And again, this is why I was talking about earlier the intention in translation and adaptation.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between questioning what was intended and questioning what's received.
Yeah.
Did the person intend me to take this message from this story? Yay or nay? That's one question. The more interesting question is, does their intention matter if that's what I took from it anyway?
Or in a very interesting example of how one scene can be received in diametrically opposed ways.
Yes.
When we covered Hercules on Media Musings, we took the scene of him diving into the river of death and thus achieving his divinity as very, very Christian.
You did.
Well, I did. Focus on the family, however.
It is a very pagan, anti-Christian
depiction, and called it spiritually unhinged.
Yeah, and I looked at it and I saw that that's a callback to the original Greek myth, and it's about love, and it's about being willing to die, and it's rebirth, and it's growth in a cultural context that nods to Christian rebirth and Christian baptism without saying it explicitly, because what it's aiming for is the spiritual and the power of love and the how love impacts a person's growth.
Yeah.
And those are three different readings of the exact same scene, and they're all, well, two of them are equally valid. I'll let you pick which two. Spiritually unhinged. Fuck. What do you want? I want some of whatever you're smoking. Spiritually unhinged. Wait, no. Yeah. So, no, I say that and I joke, but if someone's got that reading, their reading's just as valid as mine. And this is something you learn at high level in like English literature and history. And when you study humanities subjects, everyone's reading has a place.
Yeah.
Its place might be at the end of the essay as a, look at what this numpty said. But you can learn just as much from a stupid reading or from a reading that doesn't have an internal logic, let's word it that way, as you can from a high level academic, well cited reading of something. And we try and get somewhere in the middle of that spectrum so you don't feel like you're listening to a textbook, but also we can have a chat and have a laugh and a giggle.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing about intention is it's not just about the intention of the creator, it's the intentions of the audience as they receive. But also, just because you didn't intend something doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Channel Punching Bag. Just look.
Yeah.
That woman wrote a book series that spawned an entire generation to get politically aware, politically active, and that same generation that she had a massive hand in making political and left-wing and progressive have now cancelled her because she's a TERF.
Yeah, or a very prominent children's author in the 90s wrote a series about a kid who literally lives in a closet under his abusive parents who want to stamp out everything special about him, but is welcomed into a magical new world. That person happens to be the Channel Punching Bag.
Yeah. And when he steps into his identity and he's welcomed into his identity, and his identity is no longer questioned and hidden, and he's not forced to obey, and he's not put through having humiliate. And I quote: "There's a bit in that book where he remembers his aunt shaving his head because his hair was growing too fast, and feeling humiliated and not wanting to go to school looking like that." And if that is not a perfect analogy for how it feels when gender dysphoria hits you, and yet his magic kicked in and regrew his hair so it was right for the following morning. Like, she did not intend that, but that reading is definitely there.
Yeah.
And you can fight me. She wrote Professor Snape, the evil, snarky, vicious character. And then we found out actually he's based on someone who was autistic and didn't take her bullshit and saw through her, and that's why she disliked him. And we all knew that long before she came up with this weird ass incel love story she gave him. We all knew that what she was describing was an autistic man with severe depression and probably PTSD, and a working class man to boot, who really in an environment that he didn't truly feel comfortable surrounded by sumptuous riches and being waited on by slaves, essentially. And we recognise that in the character as the audience. She never intended us to like Snape. The only reason she wrote that ending for is because the fans responded so well to the character. Like, she changed the ending for that character. Like, because I really hope she did, otherwise it's really not whatever. But, yes. And entire books on that character and his the mental health issues that he are prominent in his characterization. Great one, a definitive reading by Laurie Kim. Read it if you can. It's brilliant. I like it. Wanna talk PTSD? Let's talk PTSD. And let's use Professor Snape, because everyone under the age of 30 knows exactly who you mean when you say Professor Snape.
Yeah.
35 at this point. Because it's a cultural zeitgeist. Which brings us on to reception versus reference. Very good at segues, aren't I?
Yes.
So, references. Keep clicking.
Yep.
Stop. Cool. So, there are multiple kinds of references. There are what I like to call illusions of grandeur. You know how I was talking your classical architecture that like evoked imagery of ancient Rome?
Yep.
Here, think about ancient Rome while you look at my pretty building. I'm going to borrow some of ancient Rome's grandeur and history and make you think of that. That's an allusion to grandeur. Arguments of fallacious arguments that say because it's a tradition, it must therefore be correct. That's kind of an allusion to grandeur. It's a call to history. And you see it all the time. Is it a throwback or is it an homage? And what's the difference? if you hashtag it Throwback Thursday, then it's a throwback, isn't it? But also, when you make homages, like, is Oh Brother Where Art Thou? Is that an homage to the Odyssey? Is it an adaptation? Or is it a completely separate film that has absolutely no reference to, that is absolutely not based on the Odyssey, but just likes to make reference to it to make the story funnier on a different level?
I can't
If
see
I,
how any sane person would take that third reading.
okay, but if I showed you Oh Brother Where Art Thou, but I didn't show you the original title card that had the quote from the Odyssey on it, would that change how you saw the film? If you were seeing it for the first time without that title card?
I'm not sure, because the Odyssey is probably the most ubiquitous, of the Homeric epics, in at least in the
Okay.
Anglosphere. So
Oh, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. That's the point I'm making. It's ubiquitous. But what that means is, if I tell you a story now, if someone releases a book now about a teenager going to a magic school, that's
yeah,
all I have to say, and the comparisons to Harry Potter are going to start.
yeah,
And it might be a throwback. It might be an homage to it. There might even be jokes within the story about Harry Potter. So that
yeah,
doesn't make it a Harry Potter story. It doesn't make it an adaptation of Harry Potter. It doesn't make it Harry Potter fan fiction. It's
yeah,
a separate story. But it might have adaptations, it might have not. You see it in modern media all the time, in TV shows that nod to current affairs, that nod to popular media. You know, how many mafia movies reference The Godfather in some way, shape, or form?
yeah,
And it is just a reference, and it's just there to say, yes, we exist in this genre, and we understand that this genre exists outside of us. That's what
yeah,
that's there for. It's there to say that we know what you thought you were getting when you came to this movie, and we would like to reassure you that yes, that is what you are getting.
yeah,
And that's what it's sometimes a throwbacks for. And sometimes it's a shorthand. So it can be a lesson from history. You don't, again, I'm going to use The Lion King as an example because I haven't done that already this stream. Um, when you see the hyenas and Scar, you immediately know Scar's going to lose.
yeah,
Like, he's a Disney villain, he's already going to lose. But if he wasn't going to lose, the way that's presented and the fact that they have that particular aesthetic, he's going to lose, and he's going to lose
yeah,
bad. And because it's a Disney movie, he's not going to, like, blow his own brains out.
yeah,
But he's going to basically do the Disney version of that.
yeah,
And Disney's very good at this. It makes stories, but then it takes lessons from history and alludes to them. Because the lesson from history is a shorthand. So you can, by making that allusion, when we see it all the time on Twitter, Goodwin's Law. Goodwin's Law of the internet. The first
yeah,
person who mentions Nazis loses.
yeah,
Okay. But when someone says Nazis, they're invoking certain things. Nazis has become a byword for fascism,
yeah,
for right-wing politics, for genocidal tendencies. But Twitter only has 240 characters, and genocidal tendencies is really long to say, never mind type.
yeah,
So we say Nazis. And that's what that we know that that's what that means. And what we are invoking is not just history of Nazis. We are invoking the deeper meaning of we cannot allow a genocidal lunatic to take over. We cannot allow rhetoric that other humans to take root in our society, because that's what that means to us.
Yeah.
But it's far easier to say you're a Nazi, and that covers it. That covers everything. That's what that means when you throw that accusation at someone in modern day. Is it right? Not necessarily. It reduces it down to its finest point. But it's Twitter. You've got 240 characters. What are you going to do? It's not like you've got an essay to say it in. So you say that, and those lessons and that history and those stories from the Holocaust, from the Second World War, are all bound up in that single word. And it's so much easier to say that single word than to have that long discussion of what it means, because it's understood that's what it means. And films do the same thing. Famously, Pulp Fiction, famous MacGuffin movie. How do you know it's a MacGuffin? How do you know in every movie that every MacGuffin movie has seen Pulp Fiction? Because they open the box or the briefcase and there's a bright gold glowing light. Because if you don't put that into the MacGuffin movie, you haven't seen Pulp Fiction, the story doesn't work, and your audience knows that you don't understand the genre you're working in, and your film flops.
Yeah.
That's what that's for. If your pirate doesn't say "R," that ain't gonna work.
Or perhaps nowadays, if your pirate doesn't say "savvy."
Yeah.
That was a terrible Jack Sparrow.
It was a terrible Jack Sparrow. Let's move on.
Yeah.
If you're creating a comedy skit and you want to show that a man is from Yorkshire, you put him in a flat cap, you give him a pint with a head on it, dog at his feet, and you've got a Yorkshireman.
Yeah.
You don't have to open his mouth. You don't have to hear his glottal stop. He's a Yorkshireman. Give him a big coat and all. Yeah? If you want to make someone a banker, what does a banker look like, Greg? Suit, fast car, 2 or 3 loose women who he's got on his phone who he can ring to come and give him a blowjob in his office anytime he likes, and a coke dealer on the side on speed dial.
And and of course, if you have ill intent, you're probably also going to put certain physical and ethnic stereotypes in there.
Exactly. If you want your character to be Muslim, you're going to make her wear a headscarf.
Yeah.
That can be a completely neutral thing to do. Muslim women wear headscarves. But when you put her in a headscarf, you're saying something about who she is. And it's a visual shorthand for your audience. She is a devout Muslim. She's got humility. If you put her in a full burqa, you're saying something about her again. If you have her with her husband out in public and she walks behind him, you're saying something again about their family dynamics, about their marriage. If she walks alongside him, it's something different. And these are all shorthands, and if they are based on stereotypes equally, and because you've alluded to it, I'm going to say it, the Jewish banker with a long nose, long fingers, a goblin basically, because channel punching bag, why not? We've already been there once today.
Yeah.
You're making that that's a visual shorthand, and your audience don't even have to know that that's what you're talking about. But that's what you're talking about. Even if you don't realise that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
If you write a comic book draw a comic book and you make your black character have big ears and a big nose and a big wide grin. You're playing into racist stereotypes. It's a visual language. You're saying something whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Every Asterix string Scummer and I ever did. And you make these illusions. You build a building, and you put three columns on either side of the front door and paint them white. You are saying something. And what you are saying matters whether you realize you're saying it or not. You might just like the aesthetic. You might just think it's pretty or think it's cool. But it does also mean more than that. You might think that plantation in Louisiana is perfect and the weather's going to be great and it's pretty. And look at the land and isn't it beautiful? It'll make wonderful wedding photos. Don't be surprised when your black guests don't actually show up to the wedding.
Yeah.
Because you're saying something. You know, just putting that up. And then you get evolution of mythical elements. And again, I'm going to use Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Your Cyclops started out as your stereotypical 12-foot tall, one-eyed brute of a monster in the original Greek.
Yeah.
Came through. And we've seen that character now is a big fat bloke who eats too much and falls asleep in the sun, but the beats are there so you can make the nod. When, you know, Disney does it all the time. Disney loves to do it. There's nothing to do. Other than, like, ruin Grimm's fairy tales.
I mean, what can I say except you're welcome?
But yeah, the Wachowski sisters in The Matrix. You go back to the Matrix, how many biblical references are there? How many references to ancient Greek stories, Shakespeare stories are there in those movies? And yet that's a sci-fi movie about someone trapped in a simulation trying to get out.
Yeah.
And yet that film hits beats that remind you of the American Civil Rights Movement, that remind you of the Underground Railroad, that remind you of ancient Rome, ancient Greece. And there's even discussions there, you know, from the Cold War and the Second World War, and they're all in there. If you watch a sci-fi movie, or any movie, and there's a bomb that goes off, and a big plume of smoke rises up, and it's all orange, what do you think of?
A nuke.
Mm-hmm. Because that image is ingrained on our psyche, and therefore that becomes a quick visual language for utter destruction, post-apocalyptic. You see how the nuke translated into Godzilla. This giant fallen thing that came and destroyed.
And how in the West the nuke translated into superheroes.
Yeah. But then again, you see Studio Ghibli. Every Studio Ghibli movie, nature versus technology. Because Studio Ghibli is heavily influenced by the fact that the creator was around and saw the aftermath of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
That's why all the bad things in Studio Ghibli are giant robots with orange flames and they make big things go boom. Because that's a visual shorthand that you could say, yes, these things are as dangerous as nuclear weapons, and it brings that baggage with it.
Yeah.
But then you have all of those things, and there comes a point where if you can click for me, win, and keep clicking, these are your examples: Old Man Disney, Grimm, Wachowskis, Channel Punching Bag, keep clicking, and when's a nod, not a nod? When it's a shake.
Damn it,
and that in itself mean like, okay, when Illusions generally are a fallacious attempt to borrow gravitas or familiarity, which makes suspension of disbelief easier for the audience. It's useful in fiction. It's insidious in reality. That's the basis of propaganda. That is the basis of most propaganda. Neoclassical architecture, allusions to ancient Rome. There's a reason every fascist state, from Hitler to Mussolini to anyone you like, likes eagles.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a short but in fiction and in storytelling, it can be a useful shortcut for a writer because you can take the lesson from history and you can tell your audience, you can point it out to your audience and tell them to look for the pitfall, for those stories. And you don't have to say everything I've just said. You can just say, "Oh, look, Nazis," and immediately it's, "Oh, look, nuclear weapons," and it's there. Or, "Oh, look, industrial weapons." Or, "Oh, look, a Frenchman with," if you want to show me a Frenchman, what do? You put someone in a stripy shirt, you put a ring of onions around his neck, and he's French.
Yeah.
Give him a baguette to sword fight with. It's a caricature, but it's a visual shorthand. It's an illusion. It's a reference. And the reason I'm using these examples rather than saying, if you've got a man stood on the bridge playing his violin, let's say in Paris, and there's a building on fire in the distance, I don't have to tell you that Nero fiddled while Rome burned. You already know that. You already know that this character's a lunatic.
Yeah.
If I tell you that a woman is going to unalive herself after her lover leaves her, I don't have to tell you about Queen Dido and Aeneas. I don't have to tell you about Cleopatra because you already know. Yeah. That's what those stories do. That's what those illusions do. Now, but there is one pitfall to all of this, making illusions and everything else. Yes, it's a great shorthand. But dear channel punching bag, Mooney McMoonface the second being a werewolf is so stupid it has its own meme.
Yeah.
Sometimes like illusions, Sirius Black the dog.
Yeah.
Can you hear that dog clap in the background?
Yes.
Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Asterix does it well. It's a children's story. It's puns. Cacophonix can't sing, but he's a bard. Ooh, irony.
Yeah. Or though that being said, I do prefer the other version of his name, which is Malacoustics.
Mm-hmm. Works the same way. But again, and that's that thing of translation, cacophonics and malacoustics. Doesn't matter which one you use. Someone chose to translate those in those ways.
Yeah.
And therefore, both give you the same feeling. You expect noise, you expect your to ache, you expect your ears to ring. Because that's what those words evoke. And that's a translation thing. But yes, Mooney McMoonface the second being a werewolf is not clever. Please don't.
Yeah.
Can we leave that level of bad puns in the past? It doesn't work. So that's most of it. Now, the one thing you do have to watch out for with references and allusions is when you are being fallaciously led to fall for the appeal to authority or to age.
Yeah.
Sometimes in fiction, there's a reason for it. If I want you to believe that my story is 2,000 years old, and when my characters find the ruins of the story, they're going to look like the ruins that just happen to be based on something from ancient Rome, that's because that's what 2,000 years ago looks like to you. So I'm, making it look like that so you feel that way. But that doesn't mean that's how it is in the story. But be so careful if you see it. It happens in politics all the damn time. Boris Johnson, less than 6 months ago, stood up and quoted Cincinnatus and thought those plebs wouldn't notice, and thought he was being clever and telling his buddies that he'd be back. It's insidious, but it's there, and it's so important to be able to recognize it. But more important than that is to recognize the intent and the result of it, and sit with. If there's one thing I want anyone who's watching the stream to take away is when you watch a piece of media, sit with your reactions to it. Did it make you happy? Did it make you sad? Did it make you angry? Did it make you question things? Did it make you paranoid? And then ask why and how. And is that what it meant to do? And if that's what it meant to do, why? Who benefits? Who profits from you reacting to this piece of media in this way? Because if more people did that, Tucker Carlson would not still be able to bring in any money, because they'll see straight through him.
Yeah.
Because that guy's just, he hits certain beats. He is just asking questions, or he builds a straw man and then tears it down.
Yeah.
Or he overgeneralizes, and then to the point of absurdity. And these are fallacious arguments, but if you question how they make you feel, you can begin to debunk them, you can begin to disassemble them. And that's what matters. Because if you don't do that, this propaganda gets its nails in, and it digs in, and it's so much harder to unlearn propaganda than it is to learn how not to fall for it in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's something we've all been through to some extent. I still, to this day, and I know, I'm sure Rim doesn't, I'm sure anyone else does, we all have something, we are biased, and we all have a blind spot. But also the lesson is, when you have a blind spot, and you learn you've got a blind spot, don't shy away from it. Interrogate it, sit with it, turn it over, play with it, figure it out, and then decide what you're going to do with it. Don't let shame or worry or concern about any damage you've done in the past stop you making progress. And this is a conversation that's for way more than just media analysis. This is for, if you were raised Catholic and you've got some funny ideas about Jews, sit down and have that conversation with yourself. It's fun. Give yourself a day off work because you're going to be up all night long, love. If you are American and you've got some funny ideas about Mexicans, sit with that. If you are Christian and you've got some funny ideas about Catholics, or vice versa, sit with it, enjoy, have fun. It might take you years. Come out a better person at the end of it. And at least you can then say, I know what I believe in. And when I believe in something, it's because I understand why I believe it, and not just because I've been told it.
Yeah.
It's very easy to just parrot what you were told and not question it. But that's boring, and we wouldn't be here if people did that. And it's to make those connections and apply things. That's so important. But that's my soapbox moment. So we're going to conclude now. Everything I've said over the last 2 hours, I'm going to sum up in one slide.
Yep.
Because that's how this works. Okay, so rule 1, lesson 1. Semantics are only important to ensure shared understanding. Words matter. When we talk about translation, adaptation, reception, allusion, reference, these words have meaning, but they only matter to make sure we're all on the same page and we all understand what each other's talking about. If I'm talking to you about an issue with a translation, but you think I'm talking about an adaptation, we're not going to have the same understanding of whether it should be accurate or authentic. So we need to have those paradigms in place, those perimeters in place. But other than that, it doesn't really matter. And also, for the record, neither does your pronunciation of Latin or Greek, because they were pronounced so differently over so long. You probably got it right to some degree. As long as people understand what you're talking about, have fun. And next one. Always consider your audience. The audience of the original, the audience of the translation or adaptation, the audience it was intended for, the audience it wasn't intended for. And take it from there. You can tell a lot about intentions from who the audience are. Next. Degrees of separation. Mark's Gospel is 4 degrees of separation, at least in modern translations, sometimes 6 or 7 degrees of separation from the original. There's only 6 degrees of separation between any 2 human beings on the planet. Consider it. Take note of it. Understand that when you read a translation, you are reading it through the prism of someone else's biases and culture and understanding and opinions. Respond accordingly. Compare, contrast. It works, trust me. Next one.
Hold on. Doing the loady thing.
Yep. Technical difficulties, folks. Please hold.
There we go. Oh.
Yep, that's fine. There is no such thing as a perfect translation. You can read a translation by a man or woman in Arabic, in French, in Russian, in German, in Polish, in English, and they'll all say something slightly different. It's not about a perfect translation. It's about a translation that keeps authenticity and that tells you what you need to know. And translations change, and what a good translation is changes, develop. Don't ever stick to the same one, because that's boring. And the way you figure out if a translation's any good is you interrogate the material. You compare it, you contrast it, you look it up on Perseus and Loeb and you Google it. Google is your friend. At least page 1 is, kind of. And the next one. Now, all that said, authenticity speaks to the heart. And that's what stories are supposed to do. And if it's authentic, it's worth discussing. And authenticity is not accuracy. But all that said, we're in the next one. Not everything's that deep, especially when it's trying to be. Everything I've just said. Yeah. Sometimes people are just having fun, making jokes, making a reference to ancient Greece because it's funny, or talking about, making a reference to ancient Rome or to medieval England or, Monty Python, or because it's funny and it's fun. Like can you imagine what Ready Player One would be like if we interrogated every single reference it made? I'm exhausted just thinking about the idea. It's fun to make references to the 80s or to the 70s.
Yeah.
Because it's a shared shorthand and a shared language, and it's fun in fiction. Be careful when you see it in reality, because that usually means someone's got an ulterior motive.
Or, as an example, in the pirate game we're playing, there's this lich who's, living in a library and, largely keeping to himself. He's basically like, if anyone's watched Avatar The Last Airbender, he's like the big owl spirit Wan Shi Tong. Well, we never learned his actual name because us as players started referring to him as Wan Shi Tong And that just became his canon name now.
Yeah. Also, that definitely sounds like the Wizard of Oz. Just
Yeah.
saying. And again, but the fact that I took that from that probably says something about me and about the way you just described that.
Yeah.
And what that says is more interesting to talk about than whether I'm right or not.
Yeah. And
which leads me on to our last point. Why was it made like this is a more interesting question than is this accurate, is this correct, is this right? And always ask why. Why is your most important question word? You should be asked why. You should always ask why and keep asking why until the answer is I don't know and I don't care. Keep digging. Even if it's not that deep, even if it is just fun, that's a valid answer, but at least ask. So yeah, that's everything from me. Just over 2 hours.
yeah.
And so, as we say, Ring, tag on.
Indoctrination is a hell of a drug.
So always use your noodle.
So that was a basic little primer to give everyone a good idea of what we're kind of to give everyone a basis of how we're going to be approaching the media we're discussing this month.
Excuse me, little primer. I just talked non-stop for nearly 2 hours. Over 2 hours. That was not little.
I mean, as opposed to a full-fledged college course.
I mean, that was basically most of at least 2 lectures of a college course.
Yeah. So, and of course, next week, if I remember right, we're doing Who Weeps for Adonis.
Yeah.
AKA The Crew of the Enterprise Kills God, episode 538.
Yeah, basically.
And the week after that, we're doing the graphic novel of 300 and Troy. So
yep.
There's going to be lots of hissy fits in that one, probably.
Lots of fireworks. Bring your popcorn to that one. We're doing those two together because 2 weeks of pieces of classical reception that drive me crazy just to think about is too much stress for my poor heart. It'll give me a heart attack. So we're not doing that. We're doing them both together, and they make good comparison pieces that will give us more to say than, oh God, about both of them.
Yeah.
So we're doing it that way.
And I'm not sure what my video this week is going to be. I have a few ideas that I might be doing my pilot for an idea that I did do polls about. That being said, another poll came back. Well, I polled, the people who follow me on Twitter and the people who actually pay attention to my community tab, and it has come back pretty much 100% in favor of me throwing together a little video of me doing the sea shanty I made for my pirate game. So that's going to be fun.
That's good.
Not sure if I'm going to make that as an extra video or if I'm going to make that as a just in place of that week video. I'm kind of halfway tempted to go towards the former or towards the replacement because this is a busy week for me. Yay, doctor's appointments and car repairs. Yay.
It's the season.
And it's basically just Holloway Joe, but different verses.
I mean, I already know what it sounds like because I know what sea shanties sound like, and that's a shorthand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, you know, next week for Meaty Musings, we're doing Who Weeps for Adonis, and then we're following it up with 300 and Troy, which means I really need to get on reading 300.
Yeah, I will say for that one, you can read 300 if you just watch the movie. If you just enjoy the movie, you should be able to follow along.
Yeah, but I already bought 300 on Kindle, so I might as well read it.
Yeah, I'm talking to our audience.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to follow along, but there's a few differences. We'll point them out just so you can see where the differences are. But the discussion is largely going to be on authenticity, on plot, on intent, because that's what I've just spent 2 hours explaining to you, and I did not do that for the good of my health.
Yeah. And if I remember right, it's
Chirac at the end.
Yep.
Which I'm really looking forward to. That's gonna have a lot to say on that one. Trigger warning for that movie if you watch it up front. It is harrowing.
Yeah.
Take care.
And for the rest of the, and then that'll lead directly into Ring's Happy Grab Bag Month, which is going to be started off with the Sandman.
Ring's Happy Grab Bag Month, otherwise known as "Isn't it wonderful? It's my birthday gift to me."
So, but yeah, next edited content coming up is probably going to be the pilot for my Analyst Ring versus the Bible. And the next installment of my going through the comic book characters in Paul Gia's video on whether I consider them presentation or representation or stereotype. And then, and who knows after that. I am getting around to doing a side-by-side comparison of Playing with the Big Boys Now versus Be Prepared.
That looks fun.
But that's a bit technically daunting for me right now, so I'm probably going to wait until I can get time to figure out the technical aspects of, you know, not only muting the audio, but having both, you know, playing simultaneously on a split screen.
Yep. Also, like, I assume this will be big news for American. My phone has just pinged me. Rest in peace, Bob the Born, the creator slash popularization person who, which in and of itself is a cultural zeitgeist and therefore is relevant to this discussion. But yes, apparently he's passed away. So rest in peeps. I don't know. Is it too soon?
And
too soon.
And remember, and you don't have anything coming up, do you?
When do I ever have anything coming up?
It's fair to ask.
It is, but yeah, it's valid. It's no, I don't have anything coming up. I do these streams and I survive.
Yeah. Also, and this was probably done on purpose. Wakanda Forever just dropped on the first day of this month, and seeing how it's Black History Month in the United States, it's probably on purpose.
Of course it is.
But I really should watch that sometime.
What does that tell you about the intention of the creators of Wakanda Forever? What are they
Yeah.
saying? Do you see how that's a more interesting question than it dropped?
Yeah.
Okay. I am going to keep hammering this point because I don't want people to leave this stream and then come into our chat next week and start talking about accuracy. Because that will, I will have opinions if you do that. I will.
Or, as I like to put it with the ends tagline for Media Musings that I lifted from The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think on. Too often, we forget that.
Yep. So take care, be good, and if you can't be good, remember, use your noodle.